Okay, that's pretty cool. All right, so this is the second class, and we're going to put some color down on the reflection of the water lily. And for this one, the reflection is kind of hard-edged. So I'm just going to move that up a little bit. There we go. That's probably better right there, huh? And so we're going to put some color down here. So we're still working light to dark. And my lily pads just have the first layer on them, but we're going to add another layer to this, and after I do the reflection down here, and then once those areas are dry, then we can add some color in the water. And part of the reason to not necessarily go in and get that done and then get that done is that if you get color everywhere, that starts you being able to look at the values and how they're working. So if you get your color on kind of everywhere in the water, then you'll know, okay, wait a minute, this is too close to this, so I need to darken here, or I need to lighten here, or you'll be able to look at that and just tell what you need to work on. So I'm getting out just some colors that I might use down here. Again, it's one of those that I did not do a color study for, so I'm just from painting water lilies and just playing with colors, things that I think will work. So I'm not going to be doing the shadow, so you can see there's shadow down in the bottom part. So we're ignoring that right now, and we're just thinking of the lighter pinks and kind of a greeny yellow. So I'm going to get out my Quinn Rose. It is not quite as pink down in the reflection as it is up in the flower itself. So I will have the Quinn Rose out, and then I think I'm going to get out, I think I'll pull out my Parole Scarlet, which is my red that would take the place of cadmium red. So if you have cadmium red or a warm red, then you could use the warm red. So those two together might give me what I want down in that bottom section. And then over on the side over here, there are some yellows that kind of morph into the pinks. So I have Aureolin yellow out, you could have Hansa yellow out, and then I also got out some Quinn Gold. And the Quinn Gold is a warmer yellow, and so it's one that I might put in there just kind of randomly. And these are harder edged, but there is some softer blurring of color. So right under the lily pad, right in here, it goes from like a yellowy green down into the pink reds, and there's no definition between that. It just changes to the pink reds. So I think I'm going to actually start here and then move out from there. And I am doing this first layer as wet and wet because I want those colors to blur. I'm not worried about hard edges at this point. The other thing to be aware of is that there is, I cannot tell, that may be a, right underneath this petal, there may be a petal that is under the water a little bit, or it's just in shadow. I can't quite tell. So because that is a hard-edged petal, eventually it's going to have a darker piece that comes in right here. But for now, I'm just going to ignore the fact that there is a darker piece right there and just include that in this area. The other thing that I think I will do, yeah, I think I'll do that, is I'm going to go ahead, there's a petal that's right here that is yellow, but I'm not going to worry about it if it changes color. So basically I'm just going to go ahead and wet this whole area. And I'm going to go down to that petal right there and then basically just use that petal edge as my line to stop at. And if you go back to look at yours and you're thinking, wait a minute, where is that? Just let me know and I'll come show you. Okay. So I'm trying to, if I can, this brush may be just a touch big. I'm trying to go around my lily pad without going over the edge, and I did go over the edge up there just a little bit with the water. Sometimes I will stay back from it and just put my paint in there later because it's easier usually to see where you're putting paint than clear water. Okay, so everything is wet. It's a little moist today with the humidity in the air, so it may stay wet a little longer than normal. The other color I'm going to get out right quick is sap green. If you do not have sap green, let me know and I'll bring some around to you, because up underneath here it is a little green, not quite as yellow. And part of that is some of the color that's in the water. So I'm going to start up there and then change to my yellow. I'm getting more of the aureolin out because I used a lot of it. And I'm just going to gently stroke that in there, and then it goes over this direction. And it's a little green under here. Now this will look light and maybe a little intense compared to what it will eventually be, because we need to add layers to adjust what we actually see as a reflection with shadow on it. This, I got more sap green. You could also, if you're working on this and you wanted to mute it right away, you could add to your green a touch of the warm red. And that was probably a little too much. There we go. So by adding that in there, that will automatically mute it just a little bit. And then I'm going to pull some more yellow. So this is where you want to make sure you have your color out so that it's ready before you put your water on. Okay, so I've got some yellow in there. And my brush is not very wet right now, so you can kind of tell because the color is not flowing too much. If it were really wet, my colors would really be running a lot. And my paper is still damp. In fact, it is pooling right here. So I'm going to lift some of that. And then I'm going to go into my reds, and there's a little bit of that greeny yellow kind of coming down into the reds. Okay, so I think I'll start with mostly Quin Rose with just a touch of the warmer red in there. And the reflection is pretty solid. There's not a lot of light showing up in it. Some areas have just a little bit of a lighter passage. And right now I'm not worried about lines or anything but just putting some color in. There is a lighter area over here that's kind of pink. And so I'm going to use more, actually there already is more water in here. Oh, and there's, yeah, there's some purple in the water where probably sky reflection is happening right here. So I probably will just ignore that and leave that as it is for now. Okay. And then as I come over here, my brush, if your brush is a little wet, get a dryer towel, just take your paper towel and dry the back edge of it. And then as you go to paint the color in here, it's not going to maybe push up into the yellow that you have already down. So it depends on how wet you're working, whether or not you need to do that. Okay. So that's giving me a first pass in that reflection. Now there is reflection here and a petal that comes down right there, so I'll use the same colors and go do that. And I forgot to cut this piece out with my tape, take that tape off, because I went over a petal that everyone else pretty much convinced me was just in the water and I should cut it off, so I'm going to do that. So let's see, do I have enough? Yeah, I think I'm okay. So I'm going to do the same thing because I kind of want it to have some of the same colors, and I'll just wet this. Okay. And then there's sap green up in the corner under that edge, and then it pretty quickly, and that's moving pretty fast because it was still pretty wet in there, pretty quickly changes to some yellow there. And there is some yellow. I'm going to put the yellow on first. Generally when you're working with yellow, it's better to paint the yellow in first. This is okay if it went on after, because of the fact that it's muted anyway, but it's a lighter color, and by putting it on first, usually you'll see that yellow in there. All right, and then I'm going back to my pinks and reds, so I'm using my Quin Rose and a touch of the Pearl Scarlet, and I see some green up in there, so I'm going to come down. I dried the back of my brush, just so you know, and I'm going to bring that down, and it's kind of light right in here. There's some yellow that kind of merges with that area. And if my edges aren't perfect right now, that's fine, because I'll come back later when I'm doing the water and straighten it up if I need to. And so I'm going to get some of that sap green on my brush, a little bit of the red, and put some of that in there. So hopefully my yellow will not disappear completely. If it's starting to dry up here, if you have a brush that is dry, or if you have a small mop brush, you can use the mop to kind of push some of that moisture level back so that you don't end up with a bloom happening. And if you didn't have a mop, you could just use a dry, soft brush if you have a soft bristle brush. Okay, so that has to dry, and it's just the first layer for that. For the lily pad that's up here, I am going to get out those same colors. So I had cobalt, I had new gamboge, and I had aureolin yellow. However, because I am increasing the value, I might also add some sap green in there. Or you could use ultramarine blue if you want to. And this is one of those things that you don't necessarily have to put color everywhere, but if you're trying to keep it looking like it's a unified whole and not have lots of lines, then you need to at least put water down if you're not putting color everywhere. And I'll explain that more in just a second. So I have my aureolin yellow. I'm going to get out new gamboge. Kind of running out of room. Okay. And then I have some sap green, but I'll get just a little more. And so what this is going to do for me, and you could literally wait to do this until you get some of the darker water in, so you know how much you want to increase their value, but I want you guys to just be able to see this so you can decide if you want to wait and put your water in, or if you want to go ahead and change their values. So right now, before I get going on that, you can see how this will dry a little lighter than it is right now, but right now this lily pad is so close in value to here that they would not work. So I would have to do something with either here or there. And this also has shadow on it, so that will help separate it from this water area. But it's some of that putting on color and then deciding, okay, do I need to darken what's next to it if need be. All right, so I'm going to actually this time, because we started with not using water, you could if you wanted to, but I did not use water the first time, but I am going to now because I may not want to put color on this everywhere. And by putting water down, that allows me to put color down but not have to put color everywhere. So I can leave some parts of it lighter and still have a soft edge. If I were doing something that's hard edged, I wouldn't have to put the water down if I didn't want to. Okay, so I'm going to grab, I think, cobalt and sap green to start. And then I want some new gamboge in there. And I'm going to bring some of that right down in there. And this is, some of this is just playing and thinking, oh, I kind of like that color, and or I want it to be warmer there or cooler there. So there's not necessarily a specific, you have to use this color here or this color there, especially since it's nature and you can play with what it looks like. Now this has already started to dry right there, the water that I put down. So I'm going to come back with some clear water here in just a second. I'm going to have to do it quickly. Okay. So I'm going to grab some clear water, and I dried my brush just a little bit because I don't want it so wet that it's going to possibly cause a bloom. Okay. So now there's another layer. It's got more depth. There, I left some areas that I just had the clear water in so that there would be some lights and darks going on. And then that may be all I have to do for this lily pad, but it will be waiting until we get some of the background water in. The other one that I'll show you right quick is there at the top. This lily pad has a darker area and a lighter area because I think it's got water on it. And so I'm going to use, I'll probably just put it on dry this time, on dry paper. Well, let's see if I can paint around that without getting my hand in. And that's probably a little too blue. So I'm going to add a little new gamboge up in here. And I have some highlights. I have some highlights that I can paint around, or if I decide, oh, it's just a pain, I don't want to paint around those, I could just paint over them if I wanted to. Okay, so I'm going to go around those. And those later, if, which I am leaving them, I guess, I can come back and soften those edges so they'll feel like they're a highlight and not some weird white spot. Okay, and there is just a little bit of a lighter edge right there, so I'm going to leave that lighter edge. So for now, I'll leave that, but I might end up coming back and putting just a little color in here so that this and that are not that much difference. We'll see how much this dries, and then I'll know. Okay, so for now, that's the way I'm going to leave it, and then I'll let you guys get some layers on, and then I'll have you come back in a little bit and we'll do some more, we'll start some color in the background just so that you have an idea of what you're doing there. So I'll come around and I'll see where you're at, and if you have questions you can. So, okay, we're gonna do the background water now, and there's a couple ways you can do it. You can do it in a couple of steps where you're putting on the first layer and then you're coming back and doing another layer. You can do it in one step, And that is going to require a lot of paint and just focusing. And that is what I'm going to try to do. So, because I want you to be able to see that. The first one that I mentioned, if you were going to do it in a couple of steps, there is in this image lighter areas and darker areas. So it's got some variation to the color of the water. And so for me, when I'm saying a couple of steps, you might put down a first layer and still have some variation to it, but you might not put the darkest color in there in the beginning if you're going to do it twice. So on my tablet, and I don't know that you guys are going to be able to see this, maybe you are, on the tablet, the background water is a lot darker than on the photo. And so because I am working off of my tablet and that's the image I'm using, I'm going to go with the darker water. Plus it makes it more dramatic. So I don't want it to look black, I don't want it to look dark green, but I want it to have enough value that it will really make the flower and the lily pads pop. And I think once the video's up, those numbers and things won't be there, so I'm going to get it in there. Okay, so I am going to get out, I could use some of my convenience colors that are pre-mixed colors that would help make this water go a lot faster, but because you guys don't have these colors, I'm going to use some things you probably will have. One of the colors, if I were going to do this, and not try to do what everybody else in the class might have, would be my green Apatite Genuine. It's a gorgeous kind of olivey green, and that's a Daniel Smith color. It's a great olivey green and a deeper green, and so it works really well to do that kind of green or olive green color in the water. And I would probably mix it with some ultramarine, maybe some New Gamboge or Quin Gold, just to give it some variety. But because I am not going to use that, because all of you don't have that color, I will be using ultramarine blue. And some of you may not have Quin Gold, quinacridone gold, so that would be my preferred choice, would be the quinacridone gold. So I'm going to get that out, and I'm going to get New Gamboge out. For those that don't have the Quin Gold, I can bring around a little bit and give you a squeeze of it. But you could do, it's not going to give you as maybe a good a mix, but what you can do is use a little bit of burnt sienna. Let me make, I'll show you the mix first. So I'm going to make, first of all, the ultramarine and get the New Gamboge out, because that's that warm yellow is going to give me sort of an olivey color with my ultramarine blue. So let me pull that out. And for right now, I have water on my brush, but you can see I'm really loading up on the pigment. And even though this is broken up, it's got things in here already, this is a lot of area to cover. So I am trying to get out a lot of paint. Now I may have to get more paint out, and you'll probably be surprised how much I'll actually have to end up using. So if you have a new tube and you want to just squeeze some out onto your palette, you can do that. You don't necessarily have to sit here and wake up your pigment. Okay. And or if you just have problems sometimes getting your pigment out of your palette, depending on your brand or the brush or the palette or whatever, sometimes it's easier to just squeeze it out of the tube. Okay, so this does not have a lot of water in it, partly because I'm going to be adding water to my paper, and I also want the color to be dark. So I don't want very much water in the mix. And I probably should have gotten my yellow out first. I always forget to do that. So if you remember, go for your yellows first, and then you're not having to get as much of the darker blue out of your brush. Okay, so I'm going to pull over this piece of paper. I'm going to get the New Gamboge out, and I'll show you what this makes And then I will have to get more New Gamboge out in a few seconds. So if I have the New Gamboge and my ultramarine, I can make a pretty dark olivey green color. Now, depending on what you're wanting to make, if this is a little too vibrant, you can get out a touch of burnt sienna. Well, I'll get more than a touch, because if I'm using that, and there are some places in the water that are warm, like there's some burnt sienna in it. So I'm going to get some burnt sienna. And I try to keep my colors kind of in the same general area where I pull them from, because then I just tend to, if I need to get more, know where they are. Okay. And so I could take some of the New Gamboge with the ultramarine and then a touch of the burnt sienna to neutralize it a little bit, and it's going to be less vibrant. So it's not quite as strong a mix. Now it's got it's a little neutralized, which in some ways I like that. The other thing you can do is, if you have quinacridone gold, it is a deeper yellow and it's already more neutral. It is a warm yellow, but it's already more neutral than the New Gamboge. So I will probably have some New Gamboge out, but I'm going to try to use the Quin Gold and ultramarine blue rather than the Quin or New Gamboge and ultramarine. So this is, I'm going to have a lot. I'm just going to put it right over that. Okay, so this is my Quin Gold. And if you have yellow ochre, you could use yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is more opaque and not quite as vibrant as the Quin Gold, but you could use it. They're pretty similar color-wise. Or, actually I don't have, I think it's Indian yellow. I don't have that on my palette, so I can't quite tell you with that one. But so this is ultramarine blue and New Gamboge. And then depending on how much blue I have in the mix, so you can get a really deep kind of olivey green with that. So it really kind of depends. None of those are wrong. It just, whatever mix you make, go with it, and then you need to, have enough out that you can get a pretty large area with color. So I am going to mostly use the quinacridone gold and my ultramarine, but I will also get out the New Gamboge. And I may put a little bit of the burnt sienna in a few places, just because when I was looking more at this one, I could see some warm places in there. So you guys see that? It's there. Okay. So a little more New Gamboge. And again, I would rather have way more paint out than I will end up needing than not have enough. And I may have to get more, but at least I'll have this out. Okay. So probably the one I'm going to use the most is my ultramarine, because it is going to be the thing that will get my water dark. There are a few places in here that I did not mask that I'm going to hopefully paint around, that will be the blue, purple blue reflections that is catching the sky color. If you're worried that you're going to paint over those and that you don't want to have to paint around them, you could pause and just mask that right quick and let it dry. Okay, so because this is a big area and I am painting around a lot of things, one, I'm going to try to use the section. So there's a place here where it's kind of by itself, and then there's a break, and then there is a big section here that kind of all connects. So I'm going to start here and then I'll move this way. So for right now, I'm not worried about here or here. And I will wet in here carefully. And I'm using a big brush. This is, I think, my number, yeah, it's my number 20. I'm wearing blue paint on my finger, which is distracting. Okay, so I'm wetting this, and I could, because these areas are small enough, I could just not wet it, but because I'm going to be wetting everywhere else, I want it to have a similar look. And also because it's background water and I want it to be blurry, I'm going to, oops, I don't need to wet there. I do need to wet, oh, and I don't need to wet that. All right, just went over one of the areas that's a reflection, but that's all right, a sky reflection. Okay, so I'm going to go into this really deep color that's over here and just dry my brush a little bit so that I can control. And then as I'm coming across, I want to use a similar color, but I might just go over to the new gamboge and pop a little bit of some yellow or green in there. So as you're working on this, I have lots of different lines in here that are things that are happening in the water. If you don't have all that, but you just want to make some variety in the background water, go from it being a little blue in places to a little yellow so that there's some variety. And you can even leave, I like some of those lighter highlights. And I'm going to go ahead and make this edge. Okay. So if I had to, I could stop right now and it would be okay because it's in a place that's divided. So I just would need to have enough color on my palette that I could come back and not have to recreate those colors. I need to fix this edge right here. That goes in there. Okay, there we go. Yep. All right, so I could use this brush to wet with, but now that I have paint on here, rather than cleaning it, I'm going to just get my other brush. And so I'm keep going over my, I should have masked them. My highlights in the, it's reflecting kind of purpley blue are in there, but oh well, not anymore. I'm trying to remember to go around this one. Okay, so there's one right there. And there are some of these edges of these lily pads where it's lighter green or white from highlight, so I'm leaving that. And when you're going around something that's really detailed like this with water, one, like I said before, you can stay back from the edge just a little bit, because if you get too close to it and then it gets over the edge, then you have to clean that up later, and it's easier to see when you're painting it in. But also we want to try to go as quickly as we can, and this gets, there's a little bit of a kind of a pinkish lily pad, yeah, the lily, sorry, that's right there. If you don't have that in there, no one's gonna know, and I think I'm going to leave it out because I drew it on there, but I don't think it needs to be in there. Okay, so this might be already drying just a little bit when you get down to this other section. So I'm going to go back up and just add a little water to that top edge, and maybe just a touch right there. Okay. So I want to try to use some of the same colors across. Sorry if my head's in the way. And if I can get that edge. And there is in here, there's a place where it's a little yellower. There's like a strip right here that goes down. Drying my brush just a touch because this is pretty wet still. I'm going to use some New Gamboge on it. So this is one of those things where if you're looking at it and it seems like there's a lot to do, that just kind of trying to break it down into smaller pieces or doing it in a couple layers would help. Okay, so you can sort of still see that yellow piece that's in there, and that's what I was trying to get. So if your paint is really wet and you go to paint that area, you're going to probably have that disappear. So that's why drying the back of your brush can help. I need to lift just a little bit. It was looking a little too heavy, a little opaque. So a little bit right in there. Okay. And then this is where the purple section is, purple blue that I'm going around right now. And my edges are a little wet, so. My paint here is pretty dry, so I'm probably going to have to add some water because it's just a little too dry. I'm just going to get it a little wetter. And there's some yellow in here. Okay. And I'm running out of ultramarine. So I'm quickly going back. So this lower section down here is probably drying too quickly. So I am going to re-wet. So if you come away from where you just last touched with your paint, you don't want to touch it right away. It'd be better to get this whole area wet. Get this part. Okay. So this is the fiddly stuff up here. Now we get to play. And so now that I've got this wet, now I can touch, and if it moves, it's fine. Okay. So for here, I can just kind of start dropping in color. And because this is a lot wetter, I'm going to need more pigment because it's going to just be too light compared to the back. And then I know I have some kind of olivey colors in the water right there. And like I said, I'm ignoring that pink lily pad that I had drawn on there, but decided it didn't need to be there. Not lily pad, sorry, lily petal. Yeah. Okay, I'm just taking a little of the water off that I had just put on because it was too wet. And going back to my ultramarine, I'm going to get my paint contaminated, but I need more pigment really quick. So that piece right there is too light. I want it to be darker. So as long as it's still damp, I can go into that area. This is starting to get a little flatter looking up there, so I don't want to touch back into that. And I do need more ultramarine. So that's where just being kind of quick and pouring out more pigment. Okay. And a little bit right there. You can also, like if you want to add some color, just taking my brush and dabbing it, just touching it, as long as there's a lot of pigment on my brush, so you don't have to make a stroke necessarily. Depends on what you're trying to do. So right in here, I want some of that, it's kind of the movement of the water. All right, so this may not dry dark enough, but for now, that's the way I'm going to leave it. And I'm going to go to the other side right quick. And actually I think I'll leave that. Hopefully, I'll keep an eye on it because I may need to take a little bit of moisture out of that, but I want it to dry kind of dark. All right, so I need to get out more ultramarine. I still have some New Gamboge and Quin Gold, but it's probably not enough. Come here, brush. So I'm going to get more New Gamboge. And some more Quin Gold. Okay. And then I'll use brush to wet. Try to stay away from those. Okay. I still did not take that off, but that's okay. And then this area down here I'll wet in a little while because it'll probably be drying. Any mask that you have on your paper will act as a dam, so it could, the water or the pigment can pool up in those areas. So anytime you're working with masks, just be aware that you may need to lift a little bit of pigment, or that it may cause a bloom if you're not aware of what's going on. And then actually that is a darker area up here, so I think I'm going to go ahead and just fill that in. Okay, so there is a dark area under the lily pad, and then in front of that is the purpley blue color that's reflecting it from the sky. There's a line. Okay, and then there's a lot of kind of olivey, yellowy green over in here, so I want to make sure I have that reflected from the other side as well. A little bit of a highlight, or it's a petal that's reflecting on the water right in here. Oops, I want more yellow. Okay, there is a open spot right there where the sky is peeking through and reflecting on the water. If you don't get that in there, no one's gonna know. So just do what you can, and I just like trying to do those things, and if they don't work out, then it's all right. Okay, so I've got my petal right there. So right now this is going to be a hard edge. Eventually, because this piece right here is a reflection in the water, that will get some shadow and color over it. So for right now, it will look a little different than our photo looks, but eventually it will change. So I'm just kind of going back and forth between the New Gamboge and the Quin Gold and the Ultramarine and varying the color that's in the water. All right, and then I'll put just a touch of water over here. Got some yellow on my brush and some here. And then this is a hard-edged opening where the shadow is hitting, where the petal is creating a shadow. So that's why I left that hard-edged. And there is a kind of a purpley blue piece right there, but again, if you don't have it, it's probably going to be okay. I'm going to put some yellow in there so that it doesn't look too different from the other piece that's right here. Okay, and for right now, again, oh, well, actually these are kind of hard-edged. That little piece, okay. So once this is dry, I might decide, you know, that's not dark enough, I'm gonna have to darken it. But it needs to be completely dry, and then I could go back and put another layer on it. If you're like, I don't know if I can do all that, like I said, go in 2 passes. So just wet it and put in some lighter colors. Put in some greens and some yellows and let it be lighter, let it dry, and then come back and do another pass. And then you can come back in with some darker value if you want to. So you don't have to try to do it all at once, but you can, okay? So you have time and I'll come around and see what you need. Okay, so I am going to add some more layers to some of these lily pads. As I said in the first part of this lesson, we just got a layer on and then we did some color in the water. If you did the water and after looking at it after it had dried, if it wasn't dark enough for you, you can go back and add more layers to that, or if you want to adjust any of the colors that happened in that wash, you can do that as well. Right now, I am okay with mine. One of the things I've been having issues with lately is that a lot of the ultramarine blue, when I mix it with another color, it separates more. So even though my water was a little greener as I was putting it on, for some reason the ultramarine blue seems to be separating, and I don't know that that is specifically one brand, because I believe I tried a couple and I had issues with both of those brands, and so it's just something to be aware of. For the water, it's kind of interesting because water then would have the feeling of it either reflection from the sky or just slightly different colors happening in the water. So I'm not going to worry about it for this. And so right now I'm getting out my Aureolin yellow, my New Gamboge yellow, and then I will pull out the cobalt that I used on the lily pads themselves, and I'll do a little more layering as I bring the value of these up a little more. So now that I have the water in, I can start to judge what's going on with some of the other colors. Okay. And then I'm also going to make a few adjustments just to a few places here, because we're going to work on this part of the reflection in class next week, and then we'll do some other things before we take the masking tape off of the water lily itself and get going on that. And just for anyone that's joining, this is the next day after the class had finished, and I'm just adding a few layers, and then I will get this video out to the students so that they can just see what I've done. Okay, so I have cobalt out, I have my Aureolin yellow, and my new gamboge. And actually I think I'm going to get just a touch more new gamboge out. Now when I'm working on the next layers, you can put water down, and that's what I tend to do when I am trying to keep the color that I'm putting down as a single wash instead of hard-edged. I want it to have soft edges between any color or value changes right now. So I'm not worried again about the shadow. I'm just going to adjust the lily pad itself, and there is a dark shadow that goes over it later. So right now I'm still just looking at the lily pad, and I want to warm this foreground lily pad up even more. So I'm using my warmer yellow, which is the new gamboge, with a touch of the cobalt in there, and I'm going to add some color and maybe just leave a few openings here and there. And this is a little yellower right in there. And then there's just a little bit there. So I'm leaving just a little bit of the prior wash peeking through so that there's a little variety. And then I'm going to go back, whoops, let me take just a touch of this. I dry my brush and just dab at the color and water that's beading up at the bottom down there, and that will keep it from back running and causing a bloom. And then I'm going to, I think I'm going to actually warm up all of these just a touch, because I was using the cobalt and Aureolin, and I don't necessarily want them exactly like the photo, but I want them to just be a little warmer. So I'm going to put water down first. And drying the back of my brush to make sure that this is not too wet as I go to apply some pigment here. In the corner, I think I'm going to make just a little bluer. Okay. I need to get out more new gamboge. I don't know that I'll end up using the Aureolin this time, but we'll see. Just may not need it. I always tend to get out colors that I might use, and then if I don't use them, you can either try to pull up that pigment and kind of put it back in the well, or just not worry about it, because it's really not that much paint that I've pulled out there. Okay, so I've already put some color here, but this one has this is a little too different in value. This part of the lily pad I believe was wet, and this is the drier part, but there is a little bit of a highlight on the right side. So I'm going to go ahead and put water just on the lighter side of this lily pad where the water isn't, and I'm going to put color on the left side of that then, and not on the right side. So it'll basically be lighter right in here and just slightly darker next to this side. And then earlier I had placed some highlights right there on the lily pad, and because they feel kind of too hard-edged and they're in the background, so I don't want them to be hard-edged, I'm using a flat brush that's just used for watercolor or acrylic. It's a not an expensive brand. I believe this is, yeah, Royal brand number 4. And so just by taking a little bit of water on there and coming into my highlight that I've got there and softening those edges, then I can blur it just a little bit and not necessarily get rid of it, but it will feel like it's connected to the lily pad a little more, and that it's a highlight. And I'm expanding that one just a little. And it depends on the paint you've used, whether it's a staining pigment or not, whether or not it will lift as easily as this is. So I'm just going to soften that little piece. And the other thing that I want to do while I have this out is I have this really strong white right here right now, and this will eventually get some color, but before it gets color, I'm going to take my flat brush with just a touch of water and soften those edges just enough so that it blurs this shape just a little bit. And eventually that will become sort of a purpley blue back there where the sky is reflecting into the water. You just have to be careful that you don't pull a lot of the pigment from around that white shape into that area. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to make sure, if I can lift it, that this white line, which will eventually get paint, is running behind that lily petal that's in front of it. So I'm going to lift and actually give it a little more pressure to lift, and I will use my paper towel to dab so that it helps pull that color out of there. And again, this depends on the pigment you've used, whether or not it's possible to do that. So it's not quite as white as it is over here, but eventually it'll look like it's the same passage of reflection, because it'll be pretty similar. And then I can do that as well right here. The only thing I have to be careful of is that I wet this lily pad a few minutes ago, so my edge here just kind of ran. I wasn't as careful while I was doing the class. I was trying to get the background water in as fast as I could so that I would give the students some time to work on theirs. Okay, so I'm just lifting that just a little bit, and again later I can go back and put a little bit of a purpley blue in there for that contrast. And same thing here, I'm just going to soften that and clean it up just a little bit. So even though watercolor is not as easy to adjust as some mediums, there are things that you can do, and this is one of them. Okay, just get a little more. And so that already has softened those edges up just a little and cleaned it up so that it is a cleaner shape. Now the other thing I can also do is in the water itself, I have some areas where it would be a stem, or maybe it's a reflection of something, and this little piece right here is like that, where it was probably a yellow-brown stem under the water. And there is another piece right here that I kind of lost, that I believe is a stem, and this eventually will get some color as well. And it really just kind of depends on what you're seeing, how much you want to put in. You don't have to put all of this in. It just is kind of interesting to me to have some of those things in there. And then this is the right color, but it lost some of its shape. So by just gently lifting without taking too much of the color off, I can kind of highlight that shape again. All right. So I'm going to go over to the edge of where the water is here. So on these, I better not do that yet. I was going to go and put some red on that one on the edge because these lily pads have a little bit of red coming around the edges, but this side of it is still a little damp, so I don't want to add that red just yet. So I think what I'll do is go work on this one right quick. And this one needs more a value change. It's not quite dark enough. And one of the ways you can tell is to just take a piece of paper, and this happens to be a piece of watercolor paper, and put just, you don't need all three, but just 2 hole punches. And if you're working from a photograph, you can take that photo and just get an idea of your values and whether or not they're working. So right now, the value on this lily pad is a lot lighter than what this one, or what the photo is showing. Not that you need to get them exactly the same, but it's just, it kind of gives me an idea that I definitely want to add some more value to that area. And as I said in class, most of the time I find that if I'm not quite happy with some area, a lot of the time it's the value needs to be pushed more, whether it's lighter or darker. So I've grabbed, oops, I did not wet it. I got Cobalt and New Gamboge on my brush, and I'm going to use this brush to wet it instead of cleaning my brush that has the paint on it. And this edge that's white right now eventually will get softened so that it feels like it's got a shiny highlight on the pad, the lily pad. Okay, almost done. And I'm not trying to put a ton of water on there, just enough to help me kind of move things around. All right. So I'm going to keep the general idea of this one with it being warmer and then going into, it actually gets pretty dark right in there, but I can't do that part just yet. So I'm actually going to add a little bit of color here, but I won't have it be hard edged yet. So right in there is the darker part of the petal. And then there is a area right in the center that is darker, where there's probably a little water pooling up. And then I'm going to go back to a little more warm green. And these layers add texture to the lily pads. Not only does it add value, but it also can add some variation to the color and add some texture. So while that is drying, there is an area on this one again that's not quite light, or is not quite as light as I want it. When I look at the image that I'm working from, I want to lighten this edge just a little bit. It's somewhat like this, but it's not quite as highlighted, but it just is a lighter edge. So I'm using my flat brush, and I'm just coming in there and trying to have sort of a random edge and using the water to help lift a little bit of that color. So that will help it feel a little bit like it's curved up just a touch, and that it's lighter right in there. Okay, bring this down just a little bit. All right. So I think I can go in and do this one. This one doesn't need a lot. The only thing I might do is add just a little bit of a touch of yellow to a couple parts of it. So I'm just going to add a little bit of clear water. And I know I said I wanted the lily pads in the back to be cooler, which they still will read as being a little cooler because I have blue down in the first glazes. So putting a little bit of warmer pigment over it is not necessarily going to be an issue. All right, so this one's not going to get a lot, but I'm going to come over with mostly New Gamboge on my brush. Just a little bit of value. I don't want the pigment really heavy. I'm not trying to make it opaque. I just want a little bit of warmth in there. And I think I'm going to add just a touch right in there. Okay. So now all of the lily pads have their second layer, and I need to dry it right quick, and then I will adjust this edge and add that shadow. And then we'll probably do the other parts. Actually, I may show you the I'll adjust a few edges here and there, and I may put a little bit of red on one of the edges just to show you that, so that if you are working on this one at home and you want to do that part of it, you can. So let me get the dryer and I will dry this right quick. Okay, so I am going to make a few more adjustments on this and then I will get this video out. And one of the things I want to do is I want to soften this edge right here so that the highlight for that lily pad will feel like it's connected to the lily pad and not just some piece of a white shape back there. And so I'm going to use my flat brush and just kind of soften that edge with a little bit of water. And I will leave the outside of the edge, this piece of the edge that's next to the next water lily. I'll leave that hard-edged for now. Okay. And then I'm going to add the darker part of the lily pad where there's some water sitting in there, and I'm going to finish lifting just a little more right here because there's a lighter section that I want to have in there. So some of these things, if someone was looking at your painting, they may not realize that it should be there if that highlight is in that spot or whatever. But to me, if you really do some good observation and notice lights and darks, and you see color changes or you add them yourself because you want to give it interest, then that will give the feeling of a more realistic scene and have more interest happening in your scene. So what I did right here was I just lifted that edge so that it would feel like it has a reflection, and there it is in the photo right along that edge, and that was just using my flat brush again. It's not completely back to white, so this is still a little more highlighted right up in here. And this piece right here is like these pieces in the water. So if you have that on your image or your painting, then you could make any adjustments that you might need so that it feels like it's not too cut out. And eventually this will get some blue purple in there. And so I'm just going to soften that just a little bit. And I also, on this one, want it to feel like it's going behind the lily pad, or the lily itself. And so I'm lifting just a little bit right there. And then I will come back. I usually, when I am trying to lift color, will come from the white side and just go back and forth in a little motion there that will help kind of wake up that paint and soften the edge. Because if I come from this direction, I could actually push pigment into that shape, and I want that shape to eventually be another color. And then down here, I got accidentally some paint or some water when I was applying the water in order to do the blurred water of the painting. I got some water over it, and so then I ended up getting color in that section, and I didn't want color in there. Later on, this will be that same kind of purpley blue that is up here, and then there's another area right down in here where it's got a little bit of a lighter purple, so I just want to blur that edge just a touch so it's not too solid right there. Okay, so right now I'm done with that. I'm going to add a little bit onto this one. And again, you want to make sure your paper is dry. If it feels cool to the touch, it is not quite dry. And I need more of my new gamboge out. I'm going to pull a little more cobalt into it this time. And I'm going to go over. There is an area where the reflection right in here is a little bluer. But I will wait and do that after this has dried. Because my lily flower is masked, I can just go right over those edges, and not have to worry about them. And then right down in here in the center is where it's got some water pooling, and so it's got a darker green feel right there, so I want to add that. And I'm just kind of varying that color in here just so that it's got a little variety. And then what I'm going to do is pull this out just a touch, and then I'm going to use a little water on that edge to blur it out into the lily pad itself. So I've got clear water on my brush. I'm going to get just a touch more because I think I took a little too much out. I'm going to put the water out just a ways and then come and touch right up against that edge. And by putting the water farther out than I want the paint to actually go, that gives it some room for that pigment to move and not create a hard edge. So I want it to have a soft blurred edge over here. And then I think I will do a little bit of that, and this time I'm just using my brush with just barely damp edge because I dried it, and then I'm just catching that edge right there because it was still slightly damp. I can do that on here, but this is starting to dry, so I have to be very careful, because if this is too dry and I put a lot of water up next to it, it's going to possibly cause a back run right in there. I think I want to do the same thing right here. And so this is starting to lose the shine, so I'm just going to be cautious about how much water is on my brush. And so now I have a little variety in that shape. So there's some hard edges in here, and then there's some blurrier places, so that it just kind of connects it to the lily pad itself a little better that way. Okay, so then I will do a little bit on this one, and then I will pause the video and get it out to you guys. Okay, so this one I'm going to come in where that highlight is, and I am just lifting so that I can blur those edges and make the highlight just a little bigger because it was kind of got overrun by some of the paint when I was painting it. And just a little more down this way. My paper towel is pretty wet, so I'm going to change towels here. I don't want to inadvertently put water on the paper from my towel, so. And then this side, I forgot to save the highlight, so I'm going to go in, whoops, a little thick there, with just the clear water and my brush and see if I can lift, which cobalt is not a staining color, so it lifts well, and the yellows come up pretty good too. So even if I don't get it quite back to the bright white, it'll still read as a reflection. Now the other thing that you can do, depending on the color you've used, if you're really trying to get the color back off of there, you can use a stiffer bristle. And this is it could be a craft brush that's got a stiffer bristle. It's still a flat brush. This is a fabric flat, and it's a brand called Dynasty. And this is a number 2. I found these at my local art store, and you can possibly buy them online. I've never tried to do that, but it doesn't have to be this brush, just a brush that has got a stiffer bristle. And I still like the smaller tip to it, because then that lets me get into smaller areas. There are some lifting brushes out there that say they're for lifting, but some of them are really big, and it's hard to use them in small areas. So I tend to like the smaller one. So I'm getting decent amount of pigment off, and I'm going to bring it around this edge. And then I will have to do just a little more to it with my flat brush. So some of this is also helping separate it from the background water to have that change in value. So that's another reason to put that on there. Okay, so I'm going to just come a little farther. All right, and then I'm going to go back with my softer flat brush and just gently kind of loosen this edge just a little bit, because I had such a hard edge there that it was a little too hard edged. So I'm just kind of waking up some of that edge and letting it blur into the shape I just lifted. Okay, so the last thing I will do, just to show you how it can change the look of the lily pad, is I will go ahead and put some red edges on a couple of these. And I'm going to use a mix because I don't want those red edges to compete with my lily, which has some pinky reds in it. And so I'm going to use, I have a quinacridone magenta on my palette, and it's a very magenta deep red, and I'm going to get just a little bit of burnt sienna. I don't want a lot of burnt sienna, but just a little. And my burnt sienna has extra burnt sienna in it right now because I took some burnt sienna out of another palette and just plopped it on there. So I probably got way too much burnt sienna out, but I'm going to go ahead and take just a little bit of that over here And this is going to just neutralize my magenta just a little bit, so it's not as intense a magenta. And then I'm just going to use it with a small brush, and I'm going to let it fade and be thicker in some areas, wider edge, and thinner in others, because it's not a solid line necessarily around the lily pad. We're seeing it kind of just there, come and go, basically. Okay, and then bring it up here. And so I want it there, but I don't want it so intense that it stands out too much. It'll just be kind of a repeat of some of the color that will be in the lily flower itself. Okay, and this isn't quite dry yet, so I'm not going to do that one. The edge on here, bring it around. And then one of the things that you can do after you've put that on there, if you want to have it feel like it's connected, is just bring your brush against the line. Right now this is still damp on this one, so it's moving pretty easily. And just soften it into the edge of the lily itself just a little bit. It makes it a little less cut out feeling. And I'm going to rotate my board so that I can do this one. And just taking a little bit of water, and then for this one I'm having to go back and forth just a little bit with my brush because it was drying already. And so that will help connect it to the lily and make it feel not too much like an outline. Plus it pushes it into the background just a little bit more because it's got a blurrier edge to it rather than a hard edge. And just a little right in there. Okay. So those are things that you can do on the other lilies. I won't continue to work on this one on the video because I'll let you guys get going on that. Yeah, so I would just look for any highlights that you can make adjustments to. If you see any color that could be water sitting on the lily pad, not necessarily a shadow, but there is in a couple of them a little bit of some water sitting there. Oh, I'll do this little bit of blue that's on there. So I'm just going to take a touch of my cobalt and dry my brush just a little bit because this is still slightly damp, so I don't want it to move too much. And I'll just put a little bit of cobalt on here because it's got just a touch of water sitting in there, so I want it to have a little bit of color. Okay. All right, so I will pause here, and I will see you guys next week, and then we will do more down here, and we may not get it done, but we'll have a little more done down here, and then we'll pull the mask off of this so that we can start the lily itself. And I look forward to class next week. Have fun. Bye.